In 1960, Orlando was cattle ranches and orange groves. The biggest attraction in Central Florida was Gatorland, a roadside alligator park. Then, Walt Disney secretly purchased 25,000 acres of swampland and transformed it into a global destination. For 50 years, theme parks dominated the economy. Orlando became synonymous with Mickey Mouse, roller coasters, and family vacations. But something fundamentally different is happening now. In 2024, tech employment in Orlando grew twice as fast as total employment. The region added nearly as many healthcare jobs as tourism jobs. And over $50 billion in development is reshaping the corridor into something that looks less like a theme park city and more like the beginning of America's next great metroplex. The scale of what is being built here is almost difficult to comprehend. But the question is not whether Orlando can build enough attractions. It is whether the city can build enough of everything else: housing, roads, transit, and jobs outside tourism. We will see how the math works out. If you are new here, consider subscribing. The kingdom that changed everything before Disney arrived, Central Florida was exactly what you'd expect from the interior of a subtropical state. Flat, hot, and largely empty. Orange groves stretched for miles. Cattle outnumbered people. The region had no major ports, no significant manufacturing base, and no particular reason for anyone to visit unless they were passing through on the way to somewhere else. Orlando in 1960 had a population of roughly 88,000. It was a small city serving a rural economy, known mainly for citrus production and the occasional tourist who wandered inland from the beaches. The infrastructure reflected this modest reality. Two-lane roads, small-town downtown, the kind of place that did not appear on anyone's radar. Then, in the mid-1960s, a series of mysterious land purchases began appearing in Osceola and Orange counties. Shell companies with names like Latin American Development and Reedy Creek Ranch were buying up massive tracts of swampland at rock-bottom prices. Local landowners had no idea what was happening. Rumors spread, aerospace companies, oil interests, various theories that all turned out to be wrong. By the time the truth emerged in November 1965, Walt Disney had assembled a property twice the size of Manhattan, 25,000 acres of Florida wetland that would become the most visited tourist destination on Earth. What Disney built was not just a theme park. It was an economic engine designed to transform an entire region. The Florida legislature granted Disney unprecedented control over the land through the Reedy Creek Improvement District, allowing the company to function essentially as its own government. Roads were built, infrastructure expanded, hotels sprouted along every highway leading to the property. Magic Kingdom opened on October 1st, 1971. Within its first year, the park drew 10 million visitors. Epcot followed in 1982. Hollywood Studios followed in 1989. Animal Kingdom followed in 1998. Each expansion pulled more tourists, more workers, more development into the corridor. Universal Studios arrived in 1990, adding competition that only accelerated the region's growth. For the next 50 years, theme parks defined not just Orlando's economy, but its identity. When people thought of Central Florida, they thought of one thing: Disney. The region became the most visited destination in America, drawing over 75 million tourists annually before the pandemic. That mental model made sense for decades, but it is no longer accurate, and the numbers prove it. The fastest growing large metro in America. In 2024, Orlando grew at 2.7%. That might not sound dramatic until you realize it outpaced all 30 of the nation's most populous metro areas. The region added 267,000 residents since the 2020 census, roughly the combined population of its four largest suburban cities. Every week, approximately 1,500 new people arrive. Here's what makes this strange. The University of Florida projected Orlando would hit certain population thresholds by 2045. Updated census data now suggests the region will cross 3 million in early 2026. That is not a small forecasting error. The demographers did not just underestimate growth, they fundamentally misjudged how attractive this corridor has become. Orlando may beat official projections by nearly 2 decades. So the question becomes, who is actually moving here, and why? The migration pattern nobody expected. The typical Sunbelt narrative assumes Americans fleeing California and New York taxes. You would expect Orlando's growth to look like Phoenix or Austin, domestic migrants seeking lower costs and warmer weather. But Orlando breaks this pattern completely. Since 2020, 65% of the region's growth came from international migration. In the year ending July 2024, that share jumped to 88%. Nearly 9 out of every 10 new residents came from abroad. This is not a domestic relocation story, it is a global migration story. It is happening in a city most people still associate with theme parks. Why are international migrants choosing Orlando over Miami, Houston, or the traditional gateway cities? Zero state income tax helps. So do living costs that remain lower than coastal hubs, despite recent increases. But the real driver is job creation at a scale that is difficult to ignore. Major corporations have noticed what the migration data reveals. Siemens Energy moved its entire United States headquarters to Orlando, bringing 3,000 employees. BNY Mellon expanded its operations to 1,200 workers. This is not mom-and-pop relocation. These are billion-dollar firms actively choosing Orlando over the coasts. And they are not just relocating, they are building at a pace that is hard to comprehend. The $50 billion transformation. 3 mega projects are reshaping Central Florida simultaneously, each one large enough to transform a region on its own. Disney received approval in June 2024 to spend $17 billion over the next 10 to 20 years. The expansion potentially includes a 5th major theme park, 2 water parks, and 13,000 additional hotel rooms. This is not maintenance spending. It is the largest investment in Disney's Florida property since the original construction. Universal opened Epic Universe in May 2025, a $7 billion bet that created 17,000 jobs and generated $2 billion in economic activity in its first year alone. Months after opening, the company filed permits for 150,000 square feet of additional construction behind the park. They are already expanding a park that just opened. Then there is Brightline. The $5 billion high-speed rail line now connects Orlando to Miami at 125 miles per hour, creating entirely new commuting and travel patterns. For the first time, Central Florida has genuine intercity rail infrastructure, the kind that reshapes how regions function. Add up the confirmed investments, and you reach a number that seems almost absurd, over $50 billion in active or announced development. You would expect this level of investment to mean tourism is more dominant than ever, but that is no longer true. The end of theme park dependency. In 2024, Orlando added 37,500 jobs. Tourism contributed 7,700 positions, which sounds significant until you see the rest of the breakdown. Healthcare added 6,900 jobs, nearly as many as the industry that supposedly defines the region. Professional and business services added even more. The real transformation, though, is happening in technology. Orlando now has 77,700 tech workers, and that number is growing at 2.3% annually, the second highest rate among the nation's 30 largest metros. Between 2019 and 2024, tech employment grew 21%, roughly double the rate of total regional employment. For the first time in Orlando's history, the number of people working in tech occupations exceeded the number working directly for tech companies. That distinction matters enormously. It means technology is not concentrating in a single sector, it is embedding across the entire economy. Healthcare companies hire software engineers, logistics firms hire data analysts, theme parks themselves have become technology operations. The University of Central Florida produces over 4,600 STEM degrees annually, feeding a talent pipeline that attracts companies seeking lower-cost alternatives to saturated tech hubs. Orlando is not competing with Silicon Valley. It is offering something different, a tech ecosystem that costs less and still delivers talent. But explosive growth always comes with a cost, and Orlando is paying it in housing. The price of paradise. From 2020 to 2024, Orlando's population grew 14%. Housing supply grew only 11%. That 3 percentage point gap sounds small until you do the math. It represents roughly 9,400 missing housing units. Nearly 10,000 households need somewhere to live and cannot find it at prices they can afford. The consequences show up everywhere you look. Average rent increased over 30% since 2019. Median household income rose only 20% over the same period. The math simply does not work. People are earning more but falling further behind. Workers who could afford a 2-bedroom apartment 5 years ago now struggle to afford a 1-bedroom. The homeownership picture is equally stark. The median home price is now 5.7 times the area's median household income, a ratio comparable to expensive coastal markets, not an affordable Sunbelt alternative. For context, housing economists generally consider a ratio above 3.0 to indicate affordability problems. Orlando has nearly doubled that threshold. Orlando now ranks 4th nationally for cost-burden renters, trailing only Tampa, Miami, and Cape Coral. More than half of renters in the region spend over 30% of their income on housing, the federal threshold for being considered cost-burdened. A significant portion spend over 50%, leaving almost nothing for savings, transportation, or emergencies. The region's growth has paradoxically destroyed its primary competitive advantage. For years, Orlando sold itself as the affordable alternative to Miami, to the Northeast, to California. Companies relocated here in part because their employees could afford to live here. Young families moved here because home ownership seemed achievable. That narrative has largely collapsed for renters and mid-market home buyers. The same forces that made Orlando attractive are making it unaffordable. The question is whether this is a temporary market correction or a permanent shift. Some economists point to rising interest rates and cooling demand as signs that prices will stabilize. Others argue that the fundamental imbalance between population growth and housing supply will keep prices elevated regardless of broader market conditions. But the region is not accepting this as inevitable. It is attempting to build its way out. Building new cities from scratch. The response to Orlando's housing crisis is not happening unit by unit. It is happening at the scale of entire planned communities, developments so large they are essentially new cities. Sunbridge spans 27,000 acres across Orange and Osceola counties. It has been described as the largest residential development in Florida history. Thousands of homes, job centers, retail, and hotels are all built around EV-ready infrastructure from the start. This is not retrofitting sustainability onto an existing suburb. It is designing a community for the transportation technology that will dominate in 20 years. Horizon West covers 32 square miles, planned for 60,000 residents across 5 distinct villages. It is already the fastest growing community in unincorporated Orange County, and it is nowhere close to build out. Lake Nona is becoming Orlando's answer to a planned innovation district. Health sciences, technology, aviation, and corporate headquarters are all converging in a single master-planned community, with its own medical city, its own research facilities, and its own identity separate from the theme park corridor. These are not suburbs in the traditional sense. They are entire communities being designed from scratch, with the lessons of sprawl-era development theoretically built into their DNA. Whether they succeed depends on something none of them can control: infrastructure. When roads become the ceiling. The Interstate 4 corridor is one of the most congested stretches of highway in the American South. Anyone who's driven through Orlando during peak hours, or really any hours, knows the experience. The infrastructure was designed for a region with a fraction of the current population. Every year, the gap between capacity and demand grows wider. Interstate 4 carries over 200,000 vehicles per day through its most congested sections. Commute times have increased steadily over the past decade. Construction projects to widen the highway seem perpetual. Orange barrels have become as much a part of the Orlando landscape as palm trees. Yet the fundamental math remains unchanged. You cannot build your way out of congestion when population growth outpaces road capacity by this margin. Public transit exists, but barely. Sunrail ridership is growing, which sounds promising until you realize the system serves a tiny fraction of the metro area. The commuter rail runs north to south through the urban core, connecting a handful of stations across 49 miles. For most Orlando residents, it is geographically irrelevant. Their homes and jobs simply are not near the tracks. Bus service fills some gaps, but in a region this spread out, buses cannot compete with the convenience of cars. Brightline has proven popular for intercity travel. It connects Orlando International Airport to Miami in roughly 3 hours. That is a genuine achievement, the first privately funded intercity passenger rail project in America in over a century. But the proposed Tampa extension remains unfunded, leaving the region's two largest metro areas without a rail connection. Orlando has the potential for genuine regional connectivity. It does not yet have the political will or the financing to build it. This is where historical patterns become relevant. Austin built its tech economy faster than its infrastructure. Traffic on Interstate 35 became legendary for its dysfunction. Atlanta sprawled outward faster than transit could follow, creating commute times that rivaled much larger metros. In both cases, infrastructure constraints eventually became ceilings on economic expansion. The same dysfunction that drove migration away from expensive coastal metros, congestion, long commutes, and erosion of quality of life started appearing in the Sunbelt cities people fled to. If Orlando follows that pattern, its growth story has an expiration date. The same advantages that attracted millions of new residents will slowly erode, replaced by the problems they were escaping. The next few years will determine whether Orlando can manage its growth without replicating that collapse. By 2045, Orlando is projected to reach somewhere between 3.7 million and 4 million residents. That is larger than the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex was in 1990. It is a scale of growth that requires everything to work simultaneously: housing supply expanding fast enough to maintain affordability, infrastructure keeping pace with demand, and economic diversification continuing beyond tourism. If the region successfully manages this transition, it becomes a template, proof that American metros can compete in the 21st century without the legacy infrastructure of older cities or the astronomical costs of coastal hubs. A demonstration that growth and livability are not mutually exclusive. If infrastructure breaks down, if the housing crisis deepens, if the economy contracts or fails to diversify further, then Orlando becomes a warning. Another example of what happens when growth outpaces planning, when the systems that attracted people in the first place collapse under the weight of success. Either way, Orlando is no longer just a theme park city. It is becoming something that will either reshape American urbanism or reveal its limits. What most people still do not realize is that the gap between what Orlando was and what it is becoming is closing faster than anyone projected. The city that was built by a mouse may end up being defined by something else entirely.